Sherry, how is this generation different in terms of how much we give to other people in terms of our information?
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about in political terms. But it is a political issue. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign.
Every single time we go online, every time we look at a website, every time we send an email message, every time we make a phone call with our mobile telephones, we're exposing ourselves, we're stripping ourselves naked to the view of anybody who is interested to find out what we're doing. We know already that private agencies are keen to look at the pattern of use of the internet that we indulge in so that they can target advertising at us. And governments in the Western world, indeed in the world at large, are anxious to keep a record of who people are talking to, what kind of information they're finding out, so that they can detect patterns of, that suggest crime or terrorism in the offing. And in all these ways, therefore, we expose ourselves to view through the use of these devices. Not that we would want to give up using these devices, they're just so useful to us, but they do expose us.
Argue that Google search is not significantly better or worse than Microsoft's or AOL's or anybody else's. But its hold over advertising is unmatched. And it's not just its model, the sort of pay-per-click, the matching of content and advertising that's so relevant, but the fact that it has a critical mass of both. If you have a critical mass of search terms, in other words, people using Google as a search engine, and the largest pool of ads against which to run against these search terms, you're able to match them better. And if you can match them better, advertisers are inclined to use you more, and this becomes a sort of self-reinforcing, positive feedback loop. What Google has is not so much a monopoly on search. The switching costs of search are pretty, one click away. What it has is the beginnings of a monopoly over internet advertising.
Are people aware of what they're trading when they contribute to the Google machine?
I think people are, whether explicitly or implicitly, pretty aware of what the trade-off is, and I don't think that's explicit. I don't think that's necessarily just for Google. I think as we go online, the deal is relatively straightforward. So when you go on Amazon and you click, and as you click through from product to product to product, you start to see the recommendations appear, either based on your past history or more typically your session. As you start looking for cameras, you start to see people who looked at this also looked at that. People who bought this, people who clicked at this bought that. In the course of your clicking, the service becomes more useful to you. The implicit, and for many people the explicit trade-off is that in exchange for watching over your shoulder as you shop, we will help you shop better.
All technology is rooted in ideology. One of the big misunderstandings of the internet is it suddenly came along, this miracle, this religious miracle that was granted to us because we were such good human beings, or maybe we behaved ourselves one day, so we got it as a Christmas present. It's absolute nonsense. The internet has a cultural and a very concrete cultural ideological context. It represents the fusion of the old military-industrial complex of Southern California and the hippie ethic of Northern California. Both were, in a sense, opposed to authority.
They're obsessed with the edge. The kind of web evangelizers are obsessed with the edge and having no center because they're anti-hierarchical. But you've also talked about the web being marked by hierarchy and oligarchy. How does that fit?
Well, that's a really good question. And it can be summarized again in the nature of the companies. There's reality and there's ideology. So when you listen to the young men who run Google, they will spout the ideology about the absence of an edge. They will talk about doing no evil. They will attempt to reform the world in their image. The reality, though, is they're monopolizing the print business. They're putting newspapers out of business. The reality is they hire 747 jets. They buy the airports next to their office and they fly around Africa. So the reality of economics and the ideology seem in contradiction, but when you understand, I think, the full history of the internet, it actually makes sense. Now, again, I'm not saying necessarily that they are hypocrites. I'm simply saying that there are these parallel worlds of the internet and the way people think. I'm not suggesting that they're consciously hypocrites or consciously opportunists, but what you have with the internet is a world on the one hand where a lot of young men, and they tend to be young men, spout a lot of nonsense, in my view, about democratization and egalitarianism and the opening up of everything. On the other hand, these young men are becoming infinitely rich and powerful.
Internet censorship is becoming an issue for every Western country. It's the biggest issue that we face in our time. So, just coming out of Germany for meeting you here, this is one of the basic topics we have right now in Germany, is that the Ministry of the Family Ministry actually has started a very shallow and propagandistic campaign to promote internet censorship, to fight child pornography. So what we can see in many countries, so this happens in other European countries, like a lot in Scandinavia as well. And Italy is another example. France is thinking about this. Austria is, something similar exists here in the UK as well. So what we see is that politicians take very stigmatized topics that no one really dares to doubt. So they are taking a stigmatized topic like child pornography, and they say we want to fight this, and so who is against our struggle against child pornography? So no one wants to be the one saying, I don't want a censorship system against child pornography. But at the end of the day, it's not about a certain content that you're filtering. The censorship system itself is neutral. It doesn't care what somebody tells it to filter. And then it's just a matter of what kind of lobby has enough political power to push into this censorship system.
In the 90s, we had the crypto wars, where GCHQ and the NSA said that we all had to give them copies of our crypto keys. We then had various child pornography scares. We now have an initiative in Brussels, for example, that would require all member states to require that their ISPs put in blocking services, ostensibly to stop child pornography. Of course, the music companies are waiting in the wings, and as soon as these mechanisms exist, they will be in Parliament and they will be in court, demanding the use of these mechanisms to stop file sharing. There are all sorts of people who see the internet as a threat and who want to control it using whichever excuse will work in the politics of the day. Ultimately, I think this is vain, because the world is just becoming so connected that in Western countries, there's nowhere you can put the censorship anymore. Networks are too dense, flows of information are too great, that censorship is basically a lost battle.
or how aware do you think people who use Twitter, your account holders, are of the privacy implications for what they put up on their public profiles?
I think we're still figuring that out. I mean, like I've said before, we're 10 years into this idea of the open exchange of information, first through blogging and now with Twitter. And people are trying to figure out and discover what the right amount is still. There are some people that go over and then, get burned and realize, okay, well, that wasn't the right way. And then there are people who do it sort of just right, and they get all these great opportunities presented to them that they hadn't thought of before. So I think the short answer is we're trying to explore and figure out with our electronic communications. We're trying to add nuance, subtlety, things that we don't have right now in email and IM. And that's what we're seeing, not just with Twitter, but all over the web. All this great stuff that's emerging in social media is people trying to find new, interesting ways to communicate, become more efficient, become more engaged, become more informed. And I think it leads ultimately to having more empathy, to understanding more about what other people are, what's happening with other people, and sort of putting yourself in their shoes more often because you're engaging with them. So I don't know if that answers the exact question, but I think the answer is we're still figuring out, we're still evolving.
We should be very worried, I think, about the amount of data concerning ourselves, including very personal, private, intimate data about ourselves, which is now out there in the public domain, both in private and in public hands. We should be worried about it for a large number of reasons, but one central reason is that this information is stored digitally in one or another location out there in a way that we may not have access to ourselves. And it's very, very easily manipulated. It's very easily changed by somebody who is either lazy, incompetent, or malevolent in some way. It's very easy for that information to be shared and for patterns of information to seem to appear to certain agencies that could put one under suspicion even if one weren't a suspicious individual. In other words, the prospect for misinformation, for corruption of our personal information, and for mistakes to be made about our personal information is massively increased by the fact that there is so much of it out there and so much of it is collated by different agencies. Inefficiency and patchiness of information is a great protection of personal privacy. And the more efficient the systems are that collect and collate data about us, the more the potential is for mistake and misuse.